Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 5 of What If Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the world leader. If you guys enjoyed this what if, and want to see part 6 of it, comment down below, and let me know. The like goal for this video is 200 likes. So like this video, to let me know that you're interested in this series, and you want the next part. And go ahead, and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. The first couple of hours after Naruto woke, he searched for his scrolls which contained his equipment, such as field rations and weapons, but was appalled to find that all of his scrolls, his pouches and the emergency supplies had been torn off of his body by the current of the arrow. He then tried to heal himself, but found that he couldn't summon his Michika up at all. The same result with his chakra. Both were still there, but he couldn't manipulate it in any form. This presented a problem. It has been stated before that dragons, and their parts, are quite weighty, even more so when compacted onto a human's frame. However, it has not been stated that Naruto, being transformed into a dragon, weighed quite a lot more than other humans. He had managed to find a fix of sorts for his situation, by leaking chakra into his muscles to strengthen them. Without chakra it seemed as if he had tripled in weight, slowing him down by quite a bit. Naruto tore the remainder of his shirt into strips, and wrapped the wounds on his back, and then let his healing factor take care of it. While he did, he noticed the scales growing on his chest, wrapping around his larger ribs protectively like plate armor. He could also feel the itching of scale growth on the back of his neck, spreading to the front as well. And then came the most important part, food and shelter. With his scales and talons, a weapon was not high on Naruto's acquire list. However, his nature as a dragon interfered with that as well. Being the apex predator, dragons were feared instinctively by every creature, air and land, being able to fly and walk on the ground, and able to breathe fire from both. Every time he attempted to sneak up on a herd of deer, these with thinner coats due to the heat, they felt his presence and scattered in fear. Every animal, even other predators, ran from Naruto. After 6 hours of fruitless hunting, Naruto's hunger and irritation finally got to him. "Stop running away," he shouted in anger. To his surprise, a wave of incandescent energy burst from his lips, dispersing upon the foliage around him without being shaped by words from the dragon language. Naruto froze in shock, his mind halted by this new occurrence. "Holy shit," he shouted, "my voice still works." When his brain began to work again, he resisted the urge to slam his head against a tree, choosing instead to leap into the air and dance upon landing. "Yes. Thank you, Akatosh." Without wasting any more time, Naruto jogged through the trees, finding a herd of deer in mid-leap away from him. Drawing on his voice joyfully, he shouted, "Kind." The wave of green energy that left his lips removed the feeling of fear from the deer, and they went back to placidly grazing in the clearing. Charging forward as fast as he could, Naruto clubbed 2 closed deer over the head with his arms, crushing their skulls, and killing them instantly. With these deaths, the other deer began to leap away. Naruto leapt and slammed into the side of one of the nearest bucks, and tackled it to the ground, fastening his talons underneath the back of his skull and pulling forward, separating head from body. Motivated by roaring belly, he ripped the hide away without care, exposing the flesh underneath. He plunged his hand into the corpse, and ripped the inedible intestines out, throwing them away carelessly. His meal almost ready and Naruto not caring to stand on standard mealtime observations, cook his food, dragon style. Burn it with fire breath and then chow down. The sound of rent flesh and talons tearing into meat echoed through the clearing as Naruto tore into the deer, eating ravenously, uncaring of the blood and juices that splattered his body. After several minutes of eating, Naruto finally sat back, the beast in his stomach satisfied. All that was left of the deer was a pile of bones. Back with all of his mental faculties, he began to strip the bodies of useful parts. Using his talons to skin the animals was a new experience, but he managed after a few small slip-ups. He used the leather from the hides to make a bag that was lined with leaves and stones chilled in a nearby stream, to act as somewhat like a fridge, the meat and edible organs packed tightly within. The rest was used to make rough leather armor that covered his unarmored parts, such as the upper parts of his arms, legs, hips, groin and chest, fastened together by leather strips he salvaged from the first year's savage corpse. Next, shelter. Naruto spent the next 6 days searching for a way out of the forest he found himself in, but to no avail. On a hunch, he had scored the bark of a tree with his talons. After 3 days of running, he found himself at the same tree. Whatever this place was, he couldn't escape. Not yet, anyway. He managed to find places to rest, and with the discovery of his voice, food was easier to get. But something nagged in the back of his mind, like he had forgotten something small but important. He'd also found signs of other people being stuck in the forest with him, a broken shaft of an arrow, used fire pits and stripped animal corpses, but had not been able to find anyone. Naruto was washing his face in a stream, splashing the cold water on his visage to clean away some of the grime he's accumulated. That feeling of something forgotten niggled in the back of his mind once more, but stronger than the previous times. It almost felt like it was pulling him upstream, like a child tugging on his sleeve and beckoning him to follow. He gathered his pack and clothes and set off, following the stream to its source. The feeling grew heavy in his mind, and he barely noticed the ground beginning to incline sharply, nor the uniform feeling of the ground beneath his feet. Something loomed out of the fog ahead of him, and a trickle of trepidation ran down his spine. The fog began to clear, and what Naruto saw made his jaw drop. It was a building made of gray stone, comprised of thousands of blocks of stone, that made steps that led to the top, where a square room with a single door sat. Naruto looked at the building with a growing sense of excitement, bubbling up from within his chest. "This will take a while," he muttered. As he took his first steps up the long staircase, his mind wondered. Just what is it in here that is calling me? What is making me feel this way? He dismissed his thoughts and focused on walking up the steps. Hours later, Naruto had finally made it to the top. He sat on the top step, panting and wiping the sweat of his exertions away. He took a long draught from a water skin he had made, inhaled deeply, then slung the water skin over his shoulder and stood. The room at the top was small and square, the one door being the only source of light. There was a series of ridges that protruded out of the floor, but they had no pattern. There was a small pillar of stone that sat in the middle of the small room, and on top of that rested a simple wooden chest. Stepping over the ridges carefully, Naruto approached the box, very gently hooking a talon underneath the lid and lifting it open. The inside was lined with red cloth, and in the center of the cloth sat a silver ring, inset with a blood-red ruby. The inside curve of the ring had series of small characters on the inside, and Naruto couldn't read them from his distance. Carefully picking the ring up, he brought it to his face and examined the words inside of it. "I will bear all of your burdens." Naruto read the carvings inside the ring. What does that mean? Taking the chance, he slipped it on his right middle finger. Instantly, he felt lighter than he had in years. "This is amazing," he crowed, jumping up and down, enjoying how his body moved. Something caught his eye on the ground, and he knelt to take a look. The ridges on the ground did have a pattern. It was a looping spiral, and it was very familiar. It was familiar to Naruto, because he wore it on his clothes, and it was worn by every ninja in his village. What the? The ground crumbled below him, and he only saw darkness and heard the rush of air as he fell. Again with this shit. Naruto groaned as he woke. Taking a few seconds to gather his bearings, he found himself in a narrow hallway, the walls dripping water between the stones. Looking up, he could only see a tiny square of light. That must be where he'd fallen through the ground. The walls were made up of rough stones placed together, but hundreds if not thousands of years of running water had made the walls smooth, and Naruto was wary of digging his talons into the eroded walls of an ancient temple. That was just asking for the temple to collapse on his head. With no way back, and no way upward, the only way to go was forward. Forward, into the dark dank bowels of an unknown temple, seemed to have family connotations. When it rains, it pours, doesn't it? Naruto muttered to himself. His footsteps echoed around him as he walked. The darkness was so complete that he could barely see a foot in front of him. Using the wall as a guide, Naruto slowly made his way through the underground passage, occasionally tapping the wall to create echoes which he could use to get his bearings. As he walked, a faint green glow began to light the passage, getting brighter as he went. Eventually, he reached the end, and his eyes bulged in surprise. It was a large, roughly circular cavern with luminescent moss that bathed the area in soft green light. Sticking from the walls were platforms, uniform in size and shape, ascending the wall in a spiral pattern separated by lengths of stone. In the center of this cavern rose a thick stone pillar that reached to the uppermost platform, top to platform of its own. The base of the pillar stretched down, past his vision and into inky blackness. Naruto grinned slightly, and backed up until his feet were at the edge of the first platform. He bent slightly, tensing his legs, before he dashed forward, pushing himself off of the platform, and onto the wall, using the talons on his feet and one of his hands to anchor himself to the wall as he ran across it. When Naruto reached the end of his momentum, he pushed off of the wall, and landed on the next platform. Naruto turned back to look at the distance he crossed with a wide smile. He shook his arms out happily. Just like riding a bike, he thought to himself. He threw himself off of the platform, and onto the wall, running along the surface with an ease he hadn't felt in a long time. As he climbed the cavern one platform at a time, he couldn't help but let his mind drift back into memories of days long since past. Flashback. Naruto, I know chakra control is important. But chakra is a tool, not something you should rely on every fight. Alduin said from within Naruto's mind. But every shinobi uses chakra. Why don't I? Naruto asked, confusion written on his face. You just said why. If every ninja uses chakra all the time, how would they deal with someone who doesn't need to use it for things they take for granted? The dragon pointed out. There are two major reasons for this kind of training. 1. If you can do what a ninja can do without chakra, you can save your reserves for tenuous situations. 2. Sensors won't be able to sense you if you don't use chakra to climb a tree or wall, giving you the element of surprise. Alright, the young blonde conceded. You've made your point. How do I start? Alduin coughed lightly. Ahem. Before we can get on to the more complicated stuff, we must first teach you how to climb. I want you to scale that tree over there in 30 seconds. Naruto dashed at the nearest tree and jumped, latching onto the trunk and started to shimmy his way up to the top. It took longer than 30 seconds for him to reach the top. That's a good way to get up a tree, Naruto, but not the best way to get up quickly. Climb back down and face the trunk. The blonde did so, eager to make his friend proud. Now, Alduin instructed, grab the trunk with your hands. Around the trunk, like that, yes. Now, when you use your feet, don't place them directly on the trunk like you're going to leap off. Use the sides to make a pseudo step and step up. Naruto tried and climbed up 6 feet far faster, and easier than it had been previously. Wow, he exclaimed, this is easy. I know, right? Now, I want you to practice climbing up and down the trees around the clearing until the motions feel natural, and then we'll get to work on being stealthy. For 6 hours, Naruto climbed tree after tree, until he could scale a 20-meter tree in seconds. He sat on the top of the tallest tree in the clearing, looking out over the tops of the trees and admiring the view. Wow, it's so pretty from up here. Naruto said to himself. I wish I could go higher. Eventually you will, kid. Once your transformation is complete, you could fly to the tallest mountain and look at the world down below. It's one of my favorite things to do, just glide through the air far above the ground, and take in the scenery underneath. Alduin commented wistfully. Do you want to be free, Alduin? The blonde asked tentatively. Of course I do, Naruto. But I won't leave you, not until I've fulfilled whatever reason RK sealed me in here with that angry-ass fox. This seal is copying my powers into you, and I have a responsibility to make sure you use them responsibly. And it's not as if we're not friends. This is the most fun I've had in centuries. Before this, it was all just work, no play. The great dragon sighed. As much fun as it is lighting things on fire, it eventually gets tedious, doing the same thing over and over again. This is a nice change of pace. They sat in silence, watching the sunset, before Naruto heard someone calling his name. Naruto. Where did you go? Naruto. Ah, that's Ten-chan. Naruto thought. I'd better go see her, before she starts ripping the trees out of the ground. The young blonde started his descent, carefully measuring his reaches in the fading light. As he neared the ground, an old branch broke away just as he stepped on it. With a yell of surprise, he plummeted 7 feet to the ground, landing on top of something soft and pink. Opening the eyes he had squeezed shut in preparation for pain, Naruto found himself nose to nose with his best friend and training partner, Tenten Higurashi. He had landed right on top of her, falling in such a way that could easily be misconstrued as something more intimate than it actually was, had someone walked into the clearing at that point. Hey, Ten-chan. Naruto greeted with a small smile. Her soft brown eyes stared up at him in surprise, before she reached up and pinched his nose. Why didn't you tell me you were training, Naruto-kun? She asked in irritation. I would have joined you. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Well, I forgot. Tenten bopped him on the forehead lightly in chastisement. Well, don't forget me next time, Baka. Or is it because? She widened her eyes as tears started to gather in the corners, her lower lip sticking out. Naruto-kun doesn't like me anymore. Naruto gave her a dry look. You know that doesn't work on me, right? Now she pouted for real. Damn. I forgot about that. But seriously, I'm always willing to train with you, Naruto-kun. You just have to ask. What about academy? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Don't you have to study? Tenten waved the question easily. PFFT. Please. I could pass that crap in my sleep. Training with you is much more productive. Naruto smiled down at her. I like training with you too. They fell silent, staring at each other and smiling at their admissions. Slowly, they both became aware of the fact that Naruto was still lying on top of her, as he had the entire conversation. Redness began to creep up their cheeks. Should probably get off of you, Naruto said sheepishly. To his surprise, her arms came up and wrapped around his back, holding him in place. You don't have to, she murmured. His thoughts whirred in his head, before he simply let it go and lay there with her. He heard her sigh in content as they snuggled. I miss this, she said simply. Remember, we used to do this every night at the orphanage. I do, he said softly. Tenten shifted and wrapped her arms around his back, hugging him to her. Why don't we do this anymore? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and wonder why, and it takes me a few seconds to realize it's because I'm not holding on to you. Naruto sighed uncomfortably. We live in different sections of town, Ten-chan. It's not that I don't miss this too, it's just that I don't think your dad would appreciate a guy sleeping with you. The gruff, humored voice startled both of them, coming from the trees nearby. I don't mind if it's you, actually. Tenten and Naruto leapt apart, blushing furiously. Tenteki-san. The large man smirked and crossed his arms over his chest. You know you're always welcome at my house, Naruto. However, he gave them a serious glare. I was a teenager, once. If you mess around, make sure you're protected, understand? Naruto gaped in shock as Tenten shouted, Dad, in embarrassment. Flashback over. Naruto was yanked from his flashback when he landed on the last platform. Even if he had started out rough, his wall-running experience came rushing back. Muscle memory is an awesome thing. Standing proudly atop the pillar was another platform, a deep series of circles carved into it in the shape of a spiral. He took a running jump and landed easily on platform, in the center of the spiral. With a short lurch, the sound of stones grinding against each other rang throughout the cavern as the platform began to descend slowly, as did the platforms on the walls. They came to a stop, nearly bucking Naruto off, as did the platforms. They surrounded him on all sides, a small circle on the front of them glowing a dark orange. Belatedly, he realized that they too formed a spiral formation on the walls. His skin prickled as the heat in the cavern rose, and the feeling of something bad descending on him was amplified by the sharp whistle that came from the circles. Without warning, an orange spear flew at Naruto from the uppermost platform, barely missing his shoulder and impacting into the platform underneath his feet. He tried to jump away from the death trap he found himself in, but his feet would not budge. Looking down, Naruto cursed at the spiral that was also glowing from underneath his talons. More spears shot at him from the other platforms, not actually hitting him, but wrapping his body in red-hot chains that ripped his clothes and sent his pack and water skin down into the inky blackness down below. Eventually, the chains stopped being fired at him, leaving Naruto completely bound, not able to move a muscle. In front of him, a pair of chains manifested out of thin air, one black and the other white. The black one wrapped about his body, squeezing him tightly. The white one wrapped around his neck, and he shivered involuntarily. The white one didn't touch his skin, instead, it grabbed his soul. And then it began to pull. Agony ripped through his body as the white chain began to pull his soul out of his body. Memories flashed through his head. Lessons on fighting, magic and history with Alduin, forging his sword with Tenten, foraging for herbs with Tsume and Hana, practicing kenjutsu with Hayate and Yugao, learning how to shoot fireballs with Makoto and Suki, baking with Hinata, sparring with Nijiko, swimming with Hanabi, throwing sushi at Yujido, napping with Samui, slaughtering bandits with Satsuriku, cooking ramen AM and Tuchi. All his precious memories, all of his experiences, were being pulled away from him and eaten by this white chain. No, no. This is my life. I will not fall. Not to you. Naruto screamed in effort, exerting all of his will, every ounce of energy, to pull his soul back. I will not die. Like 1,000 links snapping at once, a great shattering sounded throughout the cavern as every section broke into pieces and faded away, leaving the cavern glowing a soft green once more. Naruto knelt on the platform, his hands on the ground as he panted. Something flowed underneath his skin, something that felt similar to chakra and Michika, but wasn't at the same time. He felt it writhing in his bones, begging to be let out. Gently, he released a bit of the power out of his hands to see what it was, taking caution from his first experience trying to bring out a fireball, where he got overzealous, and it exploded in his face. Slowly, very slowly, a sharp tip, similar to that of a spear poked out of the palm of his hand. Naruto knew that it could change any part of his skin, and there was no pain. Pushing some more, he was rewarded by the head being pushed out by chain links that were dull gray. Looking up, he spotted another glowing spiral, this one embedded in the wall, nowhere near any of the platforms. The inside spiral looked to be gouged out by something sharp. With no other choice, Naruto drew his arm back and thrust his palm forward, willing the power out. With a sharp rattle, a spear-tipped length of chain shot across the distance from his palm, and stabbed deep into the center of the spiral. Something clicked, and with the rumble of ancient gears, a large slab of stone fell away, revealing a passage lit by green moss that hung from round beams that supported the sides of the passage. Each beam had long tendrils of moss reaching down to the ground, but the exact middle was shorter than the rest, showing that it had started growing later. Taking stock of his options, Naruto realized that he only had one swing. He stepped off of the edge of the platform, falling a short distance before his momentum swung him in a wide arc. Reaching the apex, Naruto released the chain, letting his inertia carry him forward and landed on the next beam. Alright, that was awesome, he commented to himself with a grin. Oh shit. The beam under his feet began to creak ominously and splinter. Naruto threw himself off of the beam and shot a chain that wrapped around another, swinging himself down then up, where he released and repeated the process. The more he did it, the easier and more natural it was for him to do so. A beam farther away than others was reached by Naruto releasing the chain earlier, leaving him enough momentum to latch onto the wall and run along it until he could shoot another chain and swing. Naruto landed on a small outcropping of rock that stuck out from the wall and looked around. Above him was a beam that had been broken, but there was enough of it sticking out of the wall that he could get a chain around it. In front of him, there was a series of beams, these ones descending like steps to a shaft of light. Finally, a way out. Naruto thought gladly. Noticing something odd, he looked up, finding the broken beam, and then looked forward seeing the first of the series leading out, more at his height but farther away. Deciding to be expedient, he shot his chain at the one farther away, but the links fell well short of the beam. Glancing at the both beams, he ran over his options in his head. Alright, I wouldn't be able to get enough momentum from swinging on the broken beam, but I can't reach the whole one. Perhaps, if I can pull the chains back, could I pull myself forward? Naruto shot a chain at the broken beam, making sure it was secure, before he reversed the flow of power hard, trying to compensate for his weight. That was a mistake. With a short cry, Naruto was yanked off of his feet and pulled quickly through the air. He let the chain go and soared through the cavern, bypassing the beam he was shooting for and sailing over the next two. Naruto quickly snagged the next, the fourth to the end in order, and swung himself onto the third, and the second, and then first. However, that's when something went wrong. The beams were made of ancient wood, decayed by the wet conditions. Something had to give eventually. It just gave out on Naruto. With a wet crack, the beam shattered, dumping Naruto on the ground and sending him rolling on the floor. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, freezing when ground began to rumble. Looking up, he spotted the pillars of rock that beam had been supporting tilt forward with a groan, crashing into each other. Ancient rock gave away and began to tilt backwards, smashing into the other, and then those falling back like dominoes. The entire temple began to rumble as chunks of stone rained down from the ceiling. Naruto turned and sprinted down tunnel as it shook to pieces around him. He had to dodge out of the way of several stones that had very nearly fallen on him as he continued to run. He ran down the tunnel, spotting green foliage within meters of his position. "Come on," he mentally shouted. He reached about 2 feet away from the exit, leaping forward to safety. When the tunnel finally collapsed on top of him, unconsciousness followed almost immediately. The temple broke, falling into the caverns underneath it, destroying itself and the secrets beneath it forever, sending a plume of dust miles into the air. Hours later, the soft padding of feet could be heard as two people, cloaked in dark brown leather and carrying bows, arrows and swords approached the still unconscious Naruto half buried under rock. "This is 2 in 1 day," one commented to the other. "Dartho will be pleased." "Indeed," the other replied. "First we found that bitch, and now we find this guy with dragon armor. This must be our lucky day." The two grabbed Naruto by the arms and pulled him out from underneath the rubble, grunting as they did. "Damn, how heavy is this shit? If he didn't know where we could find more, I'd just steal the armor and kill him." Something struck Naruto across the face, rousing him from his unconsciousness and drawing a groan from the dazed dragon. "Ah, he's awake. Good," a silky voice said from above him. Naruto opened his eyes slowly, blinking as the harsh light from the lantern shined in his face. When he recovered, he looked up to see someone, a tall male with his face covered by a cowl, and hood peering down at him with a grin. "Welcome back to the land of living," the man said sarcastically. "I'm surprised you're still alive, after having that temple fall on top of you." Something shifted and clanked to Naruto's left, drawing his attention. It was a woman, that much being visible even with her cloak and cowl. She was sitting on the ground, with her back to a wooden pole, her arms stretched above her head and shackled. It was then that Naruto realized that he was in the same position, with his arms tied above his head with chains. The captor kicked Naruto in the side to get his attention. "You, pay attention. I want you to tell me how you got that armor. Now." The blonde gave his captor a dry glare. "How about no?" The man's dark red eyes narrowed, before his face smoothed out. "Very well then. Torture it is." He strode across the tent to a table that was covered in various vicious-looking implements along with a fire pit. "Now, what will make you talk?" Naruto looked over to his fellow captive and met her ice blue eyes. He made a low shush gesture and tilted his head up at the chains around his wrists. She looked up and watched as he wrapped his hand around a few of the links and crushed them, using his other hand to muffle the sound. Naruto slowly pulled the chains away and dropped them in the grass as he got to his feet quietly. He snuck across the tent to the man who was talking quietly to himself about which implement he should use. Naruto stood behind the man and wrapped his left arm around his neck and his right across the man's mouth, pulling down to the ground while muffling his shouts. Naruto jerked his arm up, dislocating the man's neck, and twisted it sharply to the right with a small crack. The man ceased struggling, dead. The dragon set the corpse down and moved to the tied woman. "Sorry about that," he commented lightly. "I wanted to take care of that nuisance before freeing you. I'm Naruto, by the way." The woman narrowed her eyes at him, but nodded in recognition. "Mirror." Naruto froze and stared into her eyes, searching for something. "I feel like I know that name," he commented to her, breaking the links that held her down. "I don't really know how, but it sounds very familiar." Mirror took his outstretched hand and let him pull her to her feet. "I don't know why you would know my name, I've never met you before. You do look familiar to me as well." They examined each other carefully and concluded that familiarity was a mystery to both of them. Naruto moved back to the corpse and pulled the hood down and cowl away, gasping in shock. "Holy, dumber. How the hell is there a dumber here?" Mira came up next to him, strapping on her sword and her quiver of arrows on her back, and stringing her bow. "What do you mean? Dumber are common outside of these grounds. You can find them everywhere in Tamriel." Naruto's head twisted slowly on his neck until he faced her with a stunned visage. "Tamriel," he whispered. "How do you know that name?" The woman gave him a questioning look. Tamriel is what the countries outside of the grounds are called. You know, Skyrim, Elsewhere, Morrowind, any of these names familiar? Naruto shook his head slowly. The lands outside of the mists haven't been called Tamriel or any of those names in over 5,000 years. Shock dawned in Mir's eyes at that, and her whole posture screamed surprise. What? How is that possible? Mir? The blonde spoke seriously. Who are you exactly? She was cut off by the sound of a battle horn being blown, the whistling of arrows and the screams of those hit by them. Come on. Mir yelled, I'll tell you, after we get to base, and we can figure this out together. Right now, we need to leave, while the others distract the hunters. She dashed out of the tent, before he could ask any other questions. I don't have any weapons, he called after her fruitlessly. Cursing once more, he quickly looted the Dunmer's body, getting a steel dagger and 3 health potions. He charged out of the tent, and came across a camp full of other such tents, with combatants fighting outside with swords, axes and clubs and similar weapons. The only real difference between one side and the other was the color of the leather armor they wore. One side, including the one that the Dunmer had belonged to, wore brown armor decorated with splashes of poisonous red paint. The other side, the one that Mir belonged to, wore dark brown splashed with light blue. Naruto found Mir running through the camp, slashing at some of the enemies she passed to support her fellows, but mostly avoiding everyone. A large man with a heavy war axe stepped in front of her, growling angrily. You're not going anywhere, bitch. Mir charged straight at him, sucking in a deep breath. Fuss. She shouted, releasing a wave of energy that stumbled the large man and allowed her time to pull her sword from its sheath and slice his neck open. Naruto gaped as he saw her use the voice. She is definitely explaining that, he thought, running after her. As he passed, the blue-cloaked combatants broke their fights and ran after him, shouting, We've got them, retreat, and followed him as he ran through the camp. The ones in red gave chase, screaming angrily and cursing them as cowards. Wind dropped in front of Naruto and drew his bow, taking aim at the blonde in the lead and firing an arrow at his face. In a blink, Naruto caught the arrow by the shaft in front of his nose, then dropped it and hurled a chain at the archer from his palm. The bladed tip ripped through the archer's neck and out of the back as blood sprayed out of the wound. Naruto called the chain back, ignoring how it decapitated the corpse and jumping over it as it fell. Outside of the camp's walls, a pair of archers stood in the trees, firing arrows at the crowd of reds chasing the blues. One was a woman with messy red hair and bald yellow eyes that was offset by the slashes of blue war paint decorating her face. Terrace, start the distraction. The muscled man next to her nodded and moved to pull a rope when a trio of arrows buried themselves in his chest and threw him off of the branch, down to the ground, where he landed with a sickening crack and did not get up again. Someone needs to distract the hunters. The red-haired woman called out, or we'll never lose them. As Naruto and the blues passed through the gate, the blonde skid to a stop and turned, letting the other pass by him. What are you doing? Mir yelled at him, keep running. Naruto sucked in a deep breath and felt the voice building in his throat, begging to be released. Yo! He shouted, shaping the voice into a continuous torrent of flames that washed over the advancing hunters and set them on fire, along with the surrounding tents. The hunters, now adequately distracted by their burning homes and flesh, were powerless to stop the blues from running off into the forest. Several hours later, the enslaved, as Naruto learned what the blue-cloaked people were called, had gotten back to their camp, hidden in a wide cavern underground. Mir and the red-haired woman approached him warily, hands tense and near weapons. You have a lot to explain, Alduin. Mir spat. Naruto narrowed his eyes on the woman as his eyes began to glow a sinister red. My name is Naruto. And you have a lot to explain as well, Davakin. Konoha, 6 months later. Vegito Nai woke from her nightmare with a sharp gasp, panting as sweat trailed down her face. The blonde Jinchuriki stumbled out of her bed and to her bathroom, where she splashed cold water on her face. Vegito looked into the mirror above her sink tiredly, taking note of the bags under her eyes, the way her hair hung lank about her face, and the stress that was evident in her whole posture. It had all started after Naruto was declared MIA. Normally, when a ninja of some renown went missing, the Hokage dispatched hunter nin to track them down and retrieve them if possible, and if not, retrieve their bodies. However, not only was Naruto the holder of a new bloodline, he was Konoha's Jinchuriki. The Hokage had dispatched Onmu squads to search for Naruto, but had so far come up with no information. As the weeks went on, this began to affect the village, and more specifically, the women that were important to Naruto. Hinata cried for 2 days straight, clutching an orange fox plushie that Naruto had gotten for her at a carnival. After those days, she threw herself headlong into training, spending every waking moment training, sparring and honing her skills. Shino had not openly reacted, preferring instead to train and create new colonies of insects in her body. On occasion, she could be found staring off into space, small tears trailing down her cheeks, mostly hidden by her glasses and jacket. Nichiko dealt with it stoically, simply saying that she believed Naruto would come back, and then leaving it at that. Her team did note that she was more aggressive and easily angered, but that was it. Suki had her mother to support her, and while both suffered, they got through their grief together, knowing that the one they both loved would come back. Vegito and Samui both had to deal with the guilt they felt from what they saw as the catalyst in pushing Naruto into leaving them behind for the mission to Suna, and therefore leading to him going missing. It was hard on both of them, but they pulled through with the resolve to apologize to the man that had a special place in their hearts. Hanabi had dealt with much like Nichiko, throwing herself into training and learning advanced moves from her father. Tenten had seemingly collapsed into herself like a singularity. The weapon Kunoichi blamed herself more so than the others for what she perceived as her part in pushing Naruto away. She hadn't been jealous that Tsume had slept with Naruto, she kind of expected something along those lines to happen. She was, however, jealous that the Inizuka matriarch had taken his virginity. Tenten and Naruto had done almost all of their firsts together. They had forged their first weapon together, they'd gotten their first cuts together, learned how to use their first weapons together, gone to their first day of academy together, he'd hidden under the desk, and even had their first heavy petting sessions together. Tenten would have had Naruto's first kiss, but Am had stolen that before she even thought of boys, or, more specifically, just Naruto. There had never been other boys. But, after all of their firsts shared, she thought they would definitely share their first sexual acts with each other. Instead, he had gone and given it away to Tsume. After Tenten had heard that, she was overcome by her anger and jealousy. The Inizuka hadn't even known Naruto, as long as she had, and then she just went and stole his virginity away. At first, Tenten had searched for Naruto all over the village, wanting to demand some answers. After she had found him, and the subsequent yelling that followed, then her verbal beatdown by Nichiko, she had seriously considered just going out and finding a random guy, and just getting it over with to get it out of the way. Several minutes later, she was disgusted with herself for thinking such things. Her first time was going to be special, with her special person. Even if Naruto didn't have his, that would just make it all the more special for him and her, as a sort of way to show how dedicated she was to winning his heart. That didn't mean Tenten wouldn't let him sweat a bit. That day, when Naruto walked into her store to get desert gear, she had given him the cold shoulder as a way to make him guilty. However, when she had looked into his eyes and saw just how sad and hurt he was, all she wanted to do was jump over that counter and hug him. Instead, Mikoto Uchiha and Misa Haruno had come up to the counter and slapped their purchases down, giving both her and Samui a frigid glare. Tenten couldn't imagine that the last time she would see Naruto would be his hurt expression when he thought she didn't like him anymore because she wanted him to feel jealous. It weighed down on her heavily during the last 6 months that Naruto had been missing, and she had shut herself in her room for a week, coming out to eat, bathe and train, and that was it. One day, Mikoto had burst into her room with a Sharingan glare in her eyes, pulled her out of her bed, sat her down in the forge, and menaced the younger Kunoichi with half-forged sword pulled out of the fire. Then, she explained to Tenten that a ninja's life is tenuous at best, and bad things happen, but not to give up hope. Afterwards, Tenten had cried as Mikoto held her resolve to be a better Kunoichi and friends stronger than ever. It wasn't only the friends in Naruto's life that had been affected by his disappearance. Almost all of Konoha felt like something was missing. It took some time for them to realize that they missed seeing Naruto running around the village with his friends, making a ruckus and having a good time. This day, the Hokage sent out a group of messengers to gather several people throughout Konoha and bring them to his office. When Yujiro and Samui arrived, they found several ninja waiting for them. Among that group were Tsume Inizuka and her daughter Hana, Nichiko and her father Hisashi, Tenten, Kakashi Hatake and their sensei Yugao, a shinobi who wore a face guard and had a plain face, and the Hokage himself. "Good, you're all here," Hiruzen said, smoking his pipe. "Now, I don't want you to get too excited, but we may have found a lead on how to find Naruto." Many in the room jumped forward, ready to raise their voices, when a thick, stifling presence fell down on them and cut off their words. "Thank you for not getting too excited," the Hokage said sarcastically. "As I said, we have a lead, not a definitive trail. I have gathered you here to discuss which of you will make a team to follow this lead. Take note, I will only allow a team of 4. Kakashi immediately stepped forward with his hand raised. "I'd like to go," he commented plainly. "With my summons and my experience tracking people down, I think I'd be the best suited." Almost immediately, Hana had stepped forward as well. "I'd like to help tracking Naruto-kun down. With my triplets, we could cover more ground in less time." The younger Inizuka looked at her mother in surprise when she didn't step up. "Mom." Tsume shook her head ruefully. "I can't go, as much as I'd like to. I still have to deal with clan business here." Nichiko and Yujiro stepped forward at the same time as Yugao did. They all looked at each other with a challenge in their eyes. "I want to help," Yujiro said first. "I can track Naruto's Biju chakra with an Ippi." Nichiko narrowed her eyes on the former Kumo Kunoichi. "My Byakugan has the 3rd longest range in my clan besides my father and his brother. I can track Naruto with my eyes." Yugao made her arguments. "I'm Naruto's Jonin sensei, and I know his actions very well." Hiruzen rested his chin on his folded hands in thought. After a minute of deliberation, he looked up. Very well. This is my final decision, and I will brook no insubordination. The team to follow this lead will be Kakashi, Yukao, Hana, and Nichiko. Gather your equipment and leave within the hour. The details of your assignment are within this scroll. Good luck. As they filed out, the Hokage tossed a small scroll to the silver-haired Jonin and tilted his head. Outside of the Hokage tower, Samui and her sister along with Tenten gathered around the Hyuga Kunoichi with serious faces. Good luck. Tenten said quietly. Bring him back please. The blonde Kunoichi nodded with her and added their own wishes, leaving and going about their day. After 4 days of running, Team Inu had finally reached the place that the scroll and the lead had come from. It was a small town, only a few houses and stores to speak of, and only around 50 people living there. The only big thing in the village was the trees on the northern end, and the entire place was covered in a light fog. Team Inu met a man outside of the only general store in town, the one who had sent Konoha the scroll, and the one who would hopefully lead them to Naruto. He was tall and lanky, with brown hair and tanned skin, wearing a pair of worn pants and scuffed sandals. Yo, he greeted them lazily with a small wave. You're the ninja wanting to go into the Kiri no Mori, right? Looking for your friend. The team approached him as he straightened his posture. That's right, Kakashi said. Are you Takeshi? The man nodded once. Yup, that's me. Me and my boys are heading into the Kiri no Mori in about an hour to gather some more herbs and game. Various odds and ends, including people, end up in the Mori all the time, and while the people stuck in there can't leave, their stuff can. If there's anywhere your friend went, it's here. The team exchanged glances and nodded. Alright, Kakashi said resolutely. We'll be coming into the forest with you. Takeshi nodded in agreement. Sure thing, more protection never hurt anyone. A couple of rules, though. First, do not enter the Kiri no Mori without one of these. He held up a simple leather cord strung with a thick ring of green and gray stone. These rocks won't deter any predators or hunters in the Mori, but it will let you come back. Without one of these stones, you will be stuck in there, forever. His words struck a worrisome chord in Konoha Ninja. Naruto didn't have one of those stones when he fell into the forest. Did that mean he would be stuck there forever? Secondly, Takeshi continued, the stones will let you keep the ability to use chakra. Without it, not only would you be stuck, you'd be powerless. And lastly, stick with the group. There's a bunch of people in the Kiri no Mori, and they love to hunt down people visiting, and they're fond of using bows to strike from a distance. That's about it. He clapped his hands together, and beckoned them to follow. Takeshi led them to a small hut on the very edge of the forest, where a group of about 3 men sat around, sharpening long knives, all wearing a necklace similar to Takeshi's. The leader of the small group handed out necklaces to the Konoha ninja, and strapped on his own long knife. Remember, don't lose those. You will never be able to leave. With that, they gathered and entered the forest, becoming lost from sight in the swirling fog. 3 hours later, the group had not come across any game at all, but had been able to gather a few herbs and few chunks of ore that were stored in packs. Takeshi walked slightly ahead of the group, his hand wrapped around the handle of his knife and his muscles tense. This is odd, he whispered to Ninja. There's usually more than enough game around here. There are fresh tracks in the ground, so I know there are some around, but something scared them off. I hate to ask this, but can you ninja check in the trees around here? There might a panther or something. The Konoha ninja, having been given hoods to hide their faces and the shiny metal headbands they wore, nodded in agreement and leapt into the trees. Nichiko jumped from one branch to another, pausing to scan the area with her Byakugan. Finding nothing, she jumped away and continued looking. She never saw the trunk of the tree she had just been on shift as red eyes opened. The cloaked figure wearing a strangely shaped hat crept along the branch slowly, until he was crouched right above Takeshi. A short, sharp whistle made the man look up as the figure leaped from the branch, descending on the helpless forager before he could shout for help. The sickening crunch and snap of bones breaking, and the squish of organs being crushed sounded through the forest like gunshot, drawing the horrified attention of the others present in the clearing. Takeshi! One of the foragers shouted in shock. The figure bent and ripped the necklace from Takeshi's neck and took off into the forest. Follow him. Takeshi ordered. The Konoha ninja leapt through the trees, chasing after the cloaked figure as it jumped over roots, and dodged tree trunks at a pace not seen outside of a ninja. The figure hopped atop a protruding root, and used it to jump onto the trunk of a tree, where it agilely pushed off of there, and onto a series of thick branches it used as steps to race across the tree tops. It jumped from one branch onto another trunk, using its hand to spin itself in another direction and take off from there, where it leaped from the branches, landing on the ground in a roll, and then jumping up to continue running. While they chased the figure, the ninja noticed the ground starting to shake, the cracking of trees echoing loudly as the rumbling drew closer. The figure suddenly produced a chain from seemingly nowhere, wrapping it securely around the trunk of a thick tree, before dashing across the small clearing, stretching the links across the way. Trees parted before something the Konoha ninja had never seen before. It looked like someone took a small boulder, set it on top of a large boulder, then given it tree trunks for arms and legs, and then animated it. The strangest thing about it was the fact that it had one big eye set in the center of its ugly face, and another cloaked figure holding on to its neck. The Cyclops charged through the growth, waving its arms wildly as it tried to dislodge the figure on its back. It never saw the chain stretched across its path, right at ankle height. The Cyclops tripped over the chain, crashing into the ground with a thunderous ruckus that shook the area. The ninja watched in awe as the two cloaked figures jumped onto the beast's back and hacked away at its neck furiously. The Cyclops struggled and flailed, but those grew weaker until they eventually stopped altogether. With a final chop, the head hit the ground and rolled away slightly. The two figures rolled the head so it was looking into the air, working together and pulling the eyeball out with a squelch that echoed through the clearing to the Konoha ninja. They stored the eyeball away and ran off together. Yugao turned to Nijiko with a questioning look on her face. "Why didn't you warn us about that thing?" Her voice wasn't accusing, just questioning. The Hyuga Kunoichi shook her head in disbelief. "I scanned the entire area, and nothing came up, no signs of life or anything. I've been using my Byakugan the entire time, and those two don't show up at all, they're like the environment moving around." Kakashi narrowed his eye on the corpse of the Cyclops, thinking hard. What the hell did they need the eye of that Cyclops for? And for that matter, why the hell is there a Cyclops? A low, cultured voice spoke from behind them, making the ninja whip around with weapons at the ready. "I see you've met the enslavers on their ritual run." He wore a hood and a cowl connected to brown leather armor that was splashed with red, and his dark red eyes peered at them from under his hood. "Who are you?" Kakashi asked cautiously, his white light chakra saber drawn and ready for use. "My name is Dartho. I'm the leader of a group of people who want to be free from this forest. Those others you saw are what we call the enslavers, another group who keep us here. Every 20 years, they gather materials from those creatures and strengthen the curse that's kept us here for so long." The tall man said with sincerity and sorrow in his voice. "And every time, we are too late to stop them from cursing us again. If I were you, I'd leave and never look back. We're looking for someone." Yuga stated with her katana in her hands. A man, with blonde hair, black face paint and red eyes, he probably wearing black scales on his arms and legs. Dartho tapped his chin in thought, before he snapped his fingers. "Aha. You mean Naruto, correct? We found him, unconscious in a river several months ago. We took him in and healed him, but the enslavers broke into our camp and kidnapped him. I can only imagine what horrible things they must be doing to him." The Konoha ninja traded glances before Kakashi spoke up. "Maybe we can work together. We need to find Naruto, and get him out. If those enslavers are cursing you, it would be mutually beneficial for us to work together." The cloaked man nodded enthusiastically. "My people and I have been searching for their camp for a year without success. If you can find it, and a way to get in, use this to call for us. We need to destroy the ritual pieces or else we will be trapped within this forest for another 20 years. He handed them a tube made of wood with a leather cord dangling from the bottom. "Point the tube into the air and pull the cord. It will signal for us to come find you. Thank you for this. If we succeed, we will be in your debt for life." About 2 hours later, Nijiko waved the others over to her position. "Well, I can't seem to find their chakra, I can still see their movements. There's a woman in a blue cloak about 60 meters away, moving at a good pace to the north. But adapting with the situation, Nijiko. Let's go," Kakashi ordered. The Konoha ninja leapt through the trees quickly, following Nijiko's directions and eventually finding the woman running through the space between trees. They followed her stealthily, keeping to the boughs above her, and at a distance. She eventually came to a stop in front of a cave made of tan rock that seemed to have only about 3 feet of space inside. The ninja moved forward as she went inside. To their surprise, the inside was much bigger than it appeared. The cloaked woman ran along one of the walls inside, leaping off to latch onto an adjacent groove in the wall. She shimmied along it, then pushed away, and jumped onto a stalactite, which she shuffled around it, and then jumped onto a pathway that led her out of their sight. Kakashi nodded at Yugao, who pulled the tube out of her pouch, pointed it up and yanked on the cord. With a light pop, a ball of red sparks flew into the air and burst into a red mini-sun that hung over their heads. Within 20 minutes, over 100 men and women in red cloaks showed up, dressed for war with bows, arrows and an assortment of weapons like swords, axes and hammers, as well as the weapons' larger, war variety two-handed versions. Dartho stood near the front with his hand on his sword. "We will be victorious tonight, my brothers and sisters," he shouted with a fist in the air. The crowd of hunters cheered as he turned to the Konoha ninja. "Lead on, my friends. This ends tonight." Kakashi walked across the chasm and found a small lever that lowered a bridge that was painted the same shade as the walls, which allowed the hunters and his comrades across the bridge. They snuck through the caves, meeting 2 sentries who were taken down quickly, not having any experience fighting against the speedy ninja. The cave they were in widened out into a large cavern, with many tents set up around campfires. As the hunters checked over their equipment, Nijiko tapped Yugao on the arm. "I'm looking over the camp here, and I don't see any evidence of these people being violent cultist slavers. In fact, they look perfectly peaceful right now." The Jonin shrugged. "Appearances hide a lot of things, Nijiko. You never really know how someone is, even if you've known them for years. The Hyuga Kunoichi nodded, but internally, her mind raced. Something about this doesn't seem right. So far, nothing that Dartho character has said seems to be true. The leader of the hunters drew his bow and knocked an arrow to the string. On my mark, he whispered, 3, 2, 1, for her scene. The hunters loosed a volley of arrows that sailed through the cavern and landed amongst the tents, gaining screams from the inhabitants. They holstered their bows and drew their weapons, charging into the camp with war cries and screams of bloodlust. The Konoha ninja moved in with them, taking down the enslavers with kunai and shuriken. Yugao moved amongst the blue-cloaked people and cut them down with swift strikes of her katana, while Hana used her 3 ninken to tear through the opposition. Dartho pointed at the largest tent in the back of the camp. That's where they'll be keeping the items for the ritual. The Konoha ninja ran through the melee, dodging strikes from the enslavers and occasionally striking back. They made it to the largest tent and ripped through the flap, coming face to face with 2 women and the man with the strangely shaped hood. Yugao moved forward with Hana and engaged the woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, as Dartho and Kakashi attacked the woman with red hair and blue face paint. Nichiko jumped forward, striking at the man in a flurry of Jaiken strikes meant to kill. The man dodged away from her, batting her fists and pokes away with his armored hands and forearms. She charged at the man to close the distance, thrusting her left fist forward with a large amount of chakra built up in it, ready to be released. Surprise showed on her face as the man caught it in his palm without any ill effects. She struck with her right hand, and was just as shocked when he caught that one as well. Nichiko couldn't react quick enough to avoid the kick he sent to her chest. She flew through the air, slamming into the cave wall. Chains wrapped around her, binding her arms to wall and restraining her completely. She looked up, just in time to see his fist headed to her face, and then darkness. The man turned away from the unconscious Kunoichi, just in time to see the blonde woman take Kakashi's chakra saber to her gut, blood spraying out of her back and dripping from her mouth. Mirror. No. Kakashi and Dartho moved away from Mirror as she hit the ground, clutching her stomach in agony as blood flowed over her fingers. The red-haired woman saw those 2 moving towards the stone bowl where several different odds and ends sat, including the large eyeball of the Cyclops. No. She dived in front of the container as the shinobi and the dummer unleashed a hail of throwing knives and kunai, taking them to her body in place of the ingredients. Ayla. The man shouted in horror as she hit the ground, weapons protruding from her body. Dartho. You son of bitch. Suddenly, man shouted, shaking the cave. Tied. He blurred out a visible sight, even for the jonin, and threw them apart. The man kicked Dartho in the face, cracking him against the wall and dazing him. He spun and ducked under a collaboration, swipe from Kakashi and Yugao, catching their backswing on his armored forearms. Hana dashed at his unprotected back, her ninken jumping forward with claws and fangs bared. Something lashed out from underneath his cloak, slamming into the Inizuka Kunoichi's stomach, and then batting away her dogs. He pushed Kakashi's arm up, pivoting and slamming an open palm into Yugao's sternum, throwing her across the tent and into the cave wall near Nichiko. He grabbed Kakashi's wrist, and twisted the saber out of his hands, and kicked it across the room, while throwing his head forward and viciously headbutting the shinobi in the face. Taking advantage of his dazed state, the man kneed Kakashi in the stomach and slammed an elbow into the back of his head, knocking the Konoha shinobi out. The man dashed across the ground, and shoulder-checked Hana into the wall, knocking the breath from her lungs, and throwing her into the realm of unconsciousness. He turned towards her ninken and roared, a sound of pure anger, rage and despair that made their canine minds shut down out of fear. He turned as someone crawled through the flap of the tent, trailing blood behind him that came from his amputated legs. Dragon. They've killed everyone. You must protect the ingredients at all costs. Collapse the roof. With his last message delivered, the man collapsed and died. Dragon walked out of his tent, watching in anger as his people were slaughtered by the hunters. I'm sorry. He whispered as a tear trailed down his face. He threw his hands up to the roof of the cavern, a multitude of chains shooting from his arms and impaling the top. Dragon pulled his arms down, retracting his chains. The cavern roof rumbled as his most important supports were suddenly taken out all at once. With a crash that could be heard throughout the entire forest, the cave came down, crushing everyone underneath. Inside the tent, Dragon closed his eyes and breathed deeply, listening to the sounds of his former home crashing to the ground. The tent was protected by an overhang of rock, and the cave-in only sealed off the front, with the back exit completely clear. Dragon turned around at the sound of shuffling, seeing Dartho struggling to crawl to the bowl. With a low growl that promised murder, he stepped forward. Kakashi awoke to the sound of flesh meeting what sounded like rock. His one visible eye was almost swollen shut, but he could see as Dartho was viciously beaten down by the other cloaked man. The jonin attempted to come to the man's assistance, but found that he could not move, due to the chains that held his arms up. Kakashi couldn't even move his feet, as he was suspended in the air by another chain, that looped under his hands, and into the ceiling. The groan of the others waking up was also heard by Dragon. He grabbed Dartho by the neck and pulled the hunter's head back, exposing his neck. Dragon dug the talons of his gauntlets into the exposed flesh and yanked back. With one pull, he ripped Dartho's head off and hurled it across the tent. Dragon pointed at the bound ninja with a forefinger. You have no idea what you bastards almost cost me. He moved across the ground to Mira's side, feeling her neck with 2 fingers. He bowed his head and closed her eyes gently, shifting her body so that she was lying on her back in a peaceful position. A pain grunt came from near the bowl, and Dragon ran to the red-haired woman, cradling her in his arms. Protect the items at all costs. Meet me at the shrine. Those were her last words, as the light faded from her eyes, and she slumped in Dragon's arms. The man closed her eyes and set her down, his back to the Konoha ninja. They could see his shoulders shake in fury as he rounded on them, his red eyes blazing with anger. You evil bastards. I should torture you for what you've almost done. You want to keep us here, fighting forever. You lie. Kakashi shouted weakly. We don't want to do any such thing. We want to know where Naruto is. Dragon jerked back in surprise. Is this a fucking joke? You're lucky the cycle restarts in 3 hours or I would poison you and watch you die slowly. Tell us where Naruto is. Yuga yelled. We won't fight you if you just let him go. Let him go? Dragon repeated incredulously. Let him go? What the fuck to think I'm trying to do? Who the hell are you people? He moved forward, ripping the hoods from their heads and freezing in shock. What? Hana narrowed her eyes on him suspiciously. What do you mean, you're trying to free Naruto? Dartho told us you are the one who kidnapped him. That you're trying to lay a curse that would them all here forever. Dragon shook his head vehemently. Dartho lied to you. We're the ones trying to get our freedom. We've gathered all of these items to summon the Daedra Lord of this realm, so he can free us. If you had destroyed any one of those ingredients, we would be stuck here for 20 years until they all respawned again. He ripped his hood back, showing his face for the first time. The Konoha ninja recoiled in shock. Naruto? Nijiko asked hesitantly. She could recognize his face clear as day, but her hesitance stemmed from one fact. He had fucking horns. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.